Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I will be giving a tutorial on how to rod in Minecraft PvP, explaining some of the mechanics behind rodding in Minecraft PvP, and telling you guys some tips and tricks on how to get better. A quick disclaimer, this video is pretty much exclusively for the pre-1.9 combat system, or the spam click as it is notoriously named. So if you are playing on a newer version such as 1.9 to 1.16, or 1.12 is also a very common version to play on that's above 1.9, then I suggest looking at some other videos, especially considering that I don't even think rodding works in a lot of those versions. Also, I will provide some videos in the description. Some of them may be mine if I get around to making some more videos, and some of them will be just videos that I've seen over time that are very good at explaining different things, and I suggest you watch some of those other videos to pick up some other techniques that you need to use in conjunction with rodding to make it effective. Anyways, I hope you enjoy the video, timestamps are in the description, and have a good day. Rodding at the most basic level of explanation is a way to start a combo on your opponent. Now, this can also be done with other projectiles such as eggs, snowballs, and a bow and arrow, but it can also be done with things such as blocks. If you can get effective at this technique, then you will pretty much be able to dominate any mode that has projectiles in it. Not only that, but it also makes other aspects of PvP, such as clicks per second or CPS, much less important. Some of the best players at UHC style PvP get an average clicks per second of around 7, which is very low, especially if you compare it to the best players in the pot PvP area, who maintain clicks per second of anywhere from 10 to 20. Of course, click speed is still relevant in rod PvP, but you'll still dominate with just an average one. So rodding, just like pretty much every other technique in Minecraft PvP, is a manipulation of latency. As you can see, this diagram is a diagram of the United States. I'm not going to tell everyone exactly where I live because obviously that's bad, but I live in this area along the northern Gulf Coast. The blue circle is about where I live. The green dot is right about where Hypixel servers are located in Chicago, Illinois, and let's say that I'm fighting someone who lives in Los Angeles. So this line represents the travel that the information going from my computer or my Minecraft client has to go to get to Hypixel servers. And in my case, it takes about 60 milliseconds to go that far. Now this gray line is the distance that the information from my computer has to go from Hypixel servers to my opponent located on the West Coast, which takes about 90 milliseconds. If we add these both up, 60 milliseconds plus 90 milliseconds equals about 150 milliseconds, and I put that plus or minus 20 milliseconds just as a margin of error because obviously it can't stay at 150 milliseconds. So that 150 milliseconds is the time that it takes information from my computer to get to Hypixel servers and then to my opponent located on the West Coast. Now let's take that idea of latency and apply it to an actual situation in Minecraft. So this line represents the travel that I travel from that position, from the left dot, which is my original position, to my current position on the right dot. And this line above it represents the amount of time that it takes me to travel that far, which in this case, in this hypothetical scenario, is equal to 1 second. And so this dot that I'm drawing now is my position on the opponent's client, which is further back because of the delay that the information has to travel from my computer to Hypixel servers to my opponent's computer, which is about 150 milliseconds in the hypothetical case we established earlier. Because of this latency, I am further ahead on my client than I am on my opponent's client, and therefore it looks like on my screen I'm hitting the person from the regular 3 blocks away that is the reach in Minecraft. However, from my opponent's screen, because I'm further back on my opponent's screen, it looks like I'm hitting them from farther away. And I'll do some quick calculations to see how far that actually is in this hypothetical scenario. Firstly, I'm going to look up how fast movement is in Minecraft, which turns out to be around 5.612 meters per second. A meter is 1 block, by the way, in Minecraft, or slightly over 3 feet. So if we take the 5.6 or so meters per second that we move in Minecraft, convert that into how many meters you move per millisecond, and then multiply that by the amount of milliseconds that the delay is, or about 150 milliseconds. And so we get 0.842 meters or blocks, which is the difference between your position on your client and the position on your opponent's client. Now this is what I'm going to call the movement advantage for the rest of the video. I'm not actually sure what the official term is, however this is what I'm going to call it. And now let's see how you can manipulate the movement advantage in your favor through rotting. So here's you running through the field to go stab your opponent in the gut, because that's what you do in Minecraft PvP. So there's you all happy. And then here's your opponent in red. He's also running the exact same speed as you, because everyone runs the exact same speed in Minecraft PvP, unless of course your opponent is walking or has speed. Now, since you are both moving the same velocity, which I will call V in this scenario, then your movement advantage will be the exact same. However, if your opponent is somehow standing still, or their movement is restricted in some way, maybe through them running up onto a block, or them having a slowness potion, or you being faster than them, they will be moving at a slower speed than you will, and therefore you will have a larger movement advantage. There you are, nice and happy because you have the movement advantage. And as you can see, you get that 0.84 blocks of extra reach, and they don't get anything because they aren't moving. You can pull this off by rotting your opponent, hitting them with a projectile such as a snowball or an egg. You can shoot them with a bow and arrow, or you can put a block in front of them or some water. Any way that slows down your opponent's movement makes you gain a movement advantage that I was talking about earlier. So now that you understand the theory behind rotting, I'll show you how to actually rot. Firstly, you need two very accessible hotkeys to be able to switch between your sword and your rod. I started out using the scroll wheel whenever I didn't play many game modes with rods, and then I switched to having the keys F as my rod and C as my sword. These were good and accessible, however, I couldn't strafe right because the D key, obviously I would have to lift my finger off of the D key and onto the F and C key while rotting. So this wasn't ideal because I could never strafe to the right while rotting. And therefore my strafing pattern was very, very predictable and people picked up on it, which isn't ideal. Of course, you can still use these two hotkeys. They're very accessible and very easy to reach. However, be aware of that disadvantage. Now I use two buttons on my mouse. My mouse that I have is a Logitech G502. They go on sale quite often. I picked it up for about $30 to $35. I can't remember which one it was. It was 2 years ago now. But I use this button as my rod and then this button as my sword. And they make it very, very accessible to switch between my rod and my sword, and I don't lose any advantage of pressing other buttons while I'm switching. The only one I do is my clicking button, which isn't a problem because obviously you're not going to need to be clicking while you're switching from your rod to your sword. So those, if you have a Logitech G502, I highly recommend those two buttons because they're very accessible, and the only disadvantage is that if you get a new mouse, then you're going to have trouble switching. So if you decide to upgrade to something such as a Final Mouse or a Glorious Model O or a Logitech G Pro, which are all very, very good but fairly expensive mice, then I suggest picking two other hotkeys so that you don't get caught up when you switch mice. Now secondly, we need to talk about rod timing. Now this is the most important part of rodding, as if you just mess it up completely, it will actually put you at a disadvantage and can easily lead to you getting comboed. So the general idea behind rodding is to knock back your opponent so that they aren't moving when you enter their hit range, disabling their movement advantage while you keep your movement advantage. So ideally, you're going to want them to take knockback as soon as you move into their hit range. This isn't a strict like 3.5 or 4 or 5 blocks away. You really have to feel it out, especially considering the difference in ping. So in the example we used earlier, with 150 ms, which is what I would consider a high ping player, the start of being high ping, the amount of blocks that they move before they actually get knocked back, as we calculated earlier, is equal to about 0.84. Now this means that you will need to rod them 0.84 blocks before you would rod someone with very low ping. So basically the higher ping the player, the earlier you need to rod them. So as you can see, I'm fighting this low ping player, and I rod him at the regular moment, which I would normally rod everyone else, considering that most people have low ping. Now in this fight, I start to go into a trade with him and I realize this guy is very laggy, probably 250 plus MS. So I back up and I realize that I need to throw my rod much earlier so that he gets knocked back when I enter his hit range, which is about 0.2 seconds after a normal ping player, and therefore about a block before. Now, this obviously takes some muscle memory and some thinking to be able to pull off, but over time in practice you will definitely get it, and it's just something to be mindful of. Also, here's a clip of me throwing the rod too early. As you can see, the opponent gets knocked back. However, when I move into his hit range, his hit cooldown is still going while mine is not, and therefore he gets the first hit and gets a combo on me. Also, here's a clip of me rodding too early, which makes it so that my opponent takes knockback and stops taking knockback before I even enter his hit range, making the rod completely useless. Lastly, you need to actually be able to hit the rods. Now, this can prove to be pretty difficult because you have to lead your shot, because of course the rod takes time to travel from your body to your opponent's body, and in general the higher ping you have, the more you have to lead your rods. So as you can see here, I'm playing on a normal low ping of about 75 ms, and then here I'm playing on high ping on an EU server where I have about 150 ms. So it's just something you have to pick up and get muscle memory for each server that you play on. Now, for predicting where your opponent's going to be, I have two pieces of advice. Firstly, try to pay attention to where your opponent is strafing. So, of course, the human mind is not random, and there will always be a pattern to someone strafing. Some better players will be better at making it more random, but you can still pick up on it. And if you can pick up on it and be able to predict where your opponent is moving, you will always be able to hit your rods. Some very common strafing patterns are just side to side rhythmically, which is very easy to predict. Not strafing at all, which is also very easy to predict. Strafing in one direction, or circle strafing, which is very easy to predict as well. Some other ones are a bit more random, such as strafing right for some amount of time, then very quickly left, then back to right. Those type of strafing patterns are slightly harder to predict. But in general, if you pay enough attention to where your opponent is going and their strafing patterns, then you will be able to hit your rods pretty much all the time if you can pick up on their patterns. The second piece of advice I can give to you is try to focus while practicing. It's very established that focused practice leads to much quicker results than just aimless practice. And especially in something like this, if you just aimlessly practice, then you will end up spamming your rod and you won't get better at hitting a higher percentage of rods. You will just get better at quickly throwing the rod, which isn't ideal. And finally, there are a couple of niche tips that you can use to improve rod PvPing in certain scenarios. Firstly, there's the rod trig. Now, there's this glitch in Minecraft PvP that has been there for ages, and honestly, the community has kind of accepted it as just a part of the game, where if you throw a projectile at someone, and immediately after the damage cooldown lets off, you hit them again with your sword, you'll deal double damage. This can be paired with critting for 1.5 times extra damage to get 3 times damage on your opponent, which is crazy. So there are two scenarios that I usually use this in. Firstly is whenever you're just going into a fight. Now you have to be careful about this because when you jump, you can be put into a combo more easily. So make sure to be careful with this technique. Secondly, and one I use way more often and is very effective, is whenever you're running away from someone, turn around, hit them with the rod, and rod trick them. It's a very useful skill to be able to do whenever you need to get maybe that last gapple off if you're about to die. And you can also get some free hits and make them stop chasing you. So as you can see here, I'm running away from him, I rod him, and then I jump and crit him, and his health went from 12 to 7, which is a massive decrease and way more than you would deal with a sword normally. Now secondly, there's another bug in Minecraft that when you throw a rod, if you switch to a different item from your rod, it won't actually deal any durability to the rod. So if you get good at switching between your rod and your sword very quickly, then your rod will never run out of durability. As you can see here, whenever I hit this poor level 1 Steve with the rod and then I switch back to my sword, it doesn't deal any rod durability. And then now whenever I start not switching, the rod deals durability. And now whenever I start switching back to my sword again and rotating, it doesn't deal any durability to the rod. So that's something very useful if you need to rod for extended periods of time and you don't have resources to create a new rod, such as maybe late game in UHCs, or duels in which you are only given one rod, such as UHC duels, classic duels, OP duels, pretty much any type of UHC or rod-based duel, you're only given one rod. Now lastly, please don't get discouraged if you find out that you're not as good as you initially expected. It is a pretty heavy learning curve, and there's always room for everyone to improve, even players who have been doing it for years. And also, fighting players who are better than you makes you learn more quickly than fighting players who are worse than you. So just don't get discouraged if someone beats you really badly. You'll learn from your mistakes, and then you'll get better in the process. This might sound quite obvious, but you wouldn't believe the amount of times I've gotten a short combo on someone, maybe a 4 or 5 hit combo, and then they just give up. I'm just sitting there like, come on man, you gotta try. You're not gonna get better if you don't try. So take my advice, and even if you're getting destroyed, don't give up, because you'll learn something from it. Anyways, thanks for watching to the end. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and see you guys next time. Bye.